Hey, Giselle, I thought I'd drop you a quick video here, just sharing a couple of thoughts that I had when you were just sharing your Instagram message with me. So, the message that I got, or the takeaway message I got from you here, was that people don't trust you, or people see you. And so you're speaking with them, and then they don't trust you that you can help them. And so they then go and speak to someone else to solve their problem. But it sounds like you're attracting people, which means that you're connecting with them. Sounds like you're attracting them, meaning you're generating leads. You're now having conversations with them, which means that you're getting into sales conversations, which is great. But then it sounds to me like where the process is, maybe where you're dropping the ball, or maybe where the process is falling down, is where they either don't trust you, they don't trust themselves, or they don't trust in the process. So I can see here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you so you can kind of see how I think about these problems. Is that when we think about trust, and I'm hopefully going to be able to share my screen with you. So here's my screen, and what I want to show you here is this is ultimately how a client trusts you, or what's actually going on when we're talking about trust. So what's going on here is we actually have the elements that go into trust. So this is ultimately trust. Now, when we're talking about trust, well, there's different dimensions of trust. So there's a client needs to trust you, which is the coach. So that's the first element. The client also needs to trust themselves. And the client also needs to trust the process. So these are the 1, 2, 3 dimensions that a client needs to be trusting in order for them to make a buying decision. So you've probably heard this before: a confused mind doesn't buy. And in order for someone to not be confused, you need to take them from confused to certain. And they need to be certain of you, they need to be certain of themselves, and they need to be certain of the process. So let's take a look at you. So when a client's certain of you, what they're really wanting to know is, do you have the capability to help them? So this is what every client is unconsciously sensing when they're interacting with you: is do you have the capability to help them? So also, do you seem confident? So do you have confidence? Do you have certainty? So do you have certainty in what you're talking about? And do you seem certain of what you're talking about? So there's your capability, which is another word for saying, do you have the skill? Do you have the knowledge? Do you also have the experience? So what a client is intuitively sensing as you're chatting to them is all these things, so that they know. They're asking, can I trust you? Now, in addition to that, they're asking, are we a fit? Like, do I like your personality? They're also asking, do I believe them? Now, this also relates to the process as well. So anyway, these are the major dimensions of what goes into whether or not someone is going to trust you, the coach. So this is the first dimension on this side, right? Now, the next dimension is, do they trust themselves? So they need to be able to trust themselves. So what does that mean? Well, they need to be able to believe in their own capability. So it's believe in their capability to solve the problem. So sometimes a client doesn't believe that they can even heal themselves or solve their own problem because they just don't believe it's possible. So sometimes they don't believe in themselves. So you need to shift their belief systems in order to make a sale. They also going to need to ultimately have a level of certainty in the value of the problem. So they've got to actually they've got to place a level of value on why that's even important enough in the first place to actually even want to do this. So they've got to actually be trusting that the value of what's on offer exceeds the price they're going to pay for it. So they need to trust. They need to trust that the problem is worth investing in the first place, which is going to be time, energy, resources, emotions, etc. So they need to trust in the problem. Now, what they're also going to need is they're going to need to trust in the process. So they're going to need to understand, they need to have a level of certainty in what are you doing for them. Excuse my messy handwriting, but I'll send you a copy of this. So you need to give them certainty on what's the process. So the way that you give them certainty on the process is that you need to show them that there is a science to what you're doing. There are steps. There is a system that you're going to be taking them through so that they can see, in the same way as if they were to walk into Subway sandwiches, they could see that they walk in at one end and they get the bread, and they walk out at the other end after they've got all the meat and the cheese and the salads and the sauces and the salt and pepper, and then they pay at one end so they can see there's a process that you start at one end and you follow all the steps and they get to the other end and there's the solution. So what they're looking for really is they're coming to you frowny face with a problem. And what they're wanting is they're wanting a solution, which is your promise, which is another word for this is the result that they're looking for. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take them on a transformational journey, and it's going to have a series of steps that you're taking them on. And so it's this process, and this process might have 4, 5, or 6 or so steps. It's this process that you're taking them on and identifying that gives them certainty in the process. So that's this step 3, is they need to have certainty or trust in the process that you're actually prescribing for them. So this process here is this bit here. Now, you as the facilitator, you're the one that's guiding them on the process. So they need to have a level of trust in you. So that's this bit. So they've got to trust you. Then they also need to trust themselves, which means they need to believe in their own capability. Another aspect here is they also need to take, I'm going to suggest here, they need to take responsibility for their part in this, which that means that they need to acknowledge that they've created it and they've got to want to get themselves out of it. So a big part of this is as soon as a client accepts responsibility for their problem, what happens is they now become emotionally invested in it, and they now are forced to want to start to, like, if you ask a client, how committed are you to actually wanting to solve this problem? That's an example of a question that gets them to take responsibility for that. So that's just an example of when you ask someone, hey, how committed are you to solving this problem? Like, and it's not a salesy question trying to force someone into buying a product. It's an honest question saying, how important is it for you? And if it's not important, maybe we shouldn't be having the conversation. So you can ask a whole series of questions. There's a whole deeper framework that I don't have time to go into here that goes into the whole science of selling. But this is essentially the nature of what's required for a client to trust you. Now, the other aspect here as well that you need to understand is that there are different dimensions of trustworthiness. Like, for example, if you were just going to McDonald's and you're going to buy a hamburger, you don't need a lot of trust in order to just buy some junk food. Like, it's just like, it's going to cost you $5, no big deal. Whereas if you were going to hire a brain surgeon to remove a tumor from your brain, you'd probably want to do your due diligence. Due diligence. Got my tongue wrapped around my mouth there. You probably want to do your due diligence, and you probably want to research that person and make sure that this person is incredibly capable, incredibly confident. So the bigger the consequence or the bigger the emotional risk for a client, the more that they're going to need to trust you. Now, another word for that is the deeper the problem is, i.e., the more sensitive it is, the more emotionally hurtful potentially it is, the longer they've had the problem and the more valuable the problem is to them, they're going to need a much deeper level of trust. So when someone's just buying a one-off coaching session, they might spend a couple $100, no big deal. But if you're selling like a 6-month program or a 12-month program for $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, then yeah, this is something you've really got to master. And so there are different dimensions here that are going on. Now, one of the things that I've found, there are phases to this. So I trust you can appreciate there's a few things going on here. For a client to trust you, which is this first dimension here, what's going on here is all of this is all of like essentially when someone trusts you, they're intuitively gauging what's your skill, your knowledge, your capability, what's your confidence, what's your level of resonance with as you're sharing with them, what's the level of connection, what's the level of rapport, how intimate do you understand their problem? And this is a function of the work that you've done, which is basically you understanding them. So when you understand them, you can connect with them. And once you can connect with them, you can educate them on everything that they need to know about what's inside this trust matrix. So as soon as you understand that these are all the elements that you need to communicate in a sales conversation, you need to go through every single one of these before a client is ready to pull the trigger and ready to say, yes, I'm ready to do this. So if they don't trust you, they won't buy. If they don't trust themselves, they won't buy. If they don't trust the process, they won't buy. If they don't value the solution, they won't buy. So really what we're doing here is we're identifying what are all the elements that are needed in order for a client to trust you, to trust themselves, and to trust the process. Now, I don't have time to go into like the full depths of this model, but what I just wanted to share with you is this side here, everything on this side is about how you're interacting with the client in terms of your connection and how you're showing up for the session. So this is all about your grounding. So this is all about the work that you've put in up until now in terms of your all of the years, and there's thousands of hours of study that you've been doing, all the books you've read and all the practice you've done. This is everything that's building into helping a client trust you. Now, in terms of a client trusting themselves, I'm going to suggest probably the reason why they're seeking us out in the first place is probably because they don't trust themselves. So this is where we've got to do a lot of work in the conversation, which is helping a client realize that they can do it, value the problem. So this is where we're actually going deeper into the conversation, where we're actually pointing out where they might have limiting beliefs. They might not value themselves. They might not be willing to take responsibility. So this is a really important part of the conversation as well. And then when you get down to process, this is also where you can do some really powerful selling, because as soon as you can point out what's the science or what's the steps in the system, they get certainty in what you are doing. So instead of them just needing to trust, instead of them needing to just trust you, what happens is there's now this foundational pillar here. Think of this as more of a, now becomes a pillar. This now becomes a pillar that supports the whole thing, because there's now a framework, there's a process, there's a science, there is a system. Another word for a process is this is just a system that is actually going to get them the result. So when you can actually show them that there's a deeper science rather than just trusting you, taking your word for it, when you can show them the process, they automatically trust you and they automatically trust themselves. So this pillar becomes like a foundation that holds up the walls of a house or the roof of a house. Think of it like a bit of a structure. So when you can articulate all of this, you'll find that your clients will start trusting you more and more. And when a client comes to see me, I know I used to feel like I perhaps had an inadequate skill set when it came to comparing myself against a therapist or a psychologist. But after the work that I've done on myself in terms of knowing how the human being functions, I know I can hold it with the best of the best psychologists in the world, because I understand how the mind works. In fact, I understand it more deeply than most psychologists because I understand psycho-spiritual principles and I understand the fundamental nature of who we are at our core. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track now, but this is the process that you need to take a client through. This is just a little bit of just from what you've described to me in the 1 minute message that you left me, what might help you. And I just thought I'd share that with you. Let me know if it helps. And yeah, I look forward to hearing back from you. Just let me know if it's helpful, if there was any insights. And yeah, I hope it helps. That's it from me. Much love. I'll see you soon.